absent, when they go ahead and watch the video, they're going to get all the information that they'll miss if they join late. So the first thing that I just wanted to say is during these sessions, if I'm looking directly at the camera, so if you're looking at me now, I'm looking directly at the camera, and if your face is on the screen, it means I'm ignoring your face on the screen. When I'm looking down like this, it means that I'm actually looking at you. Okay, so just be aware of that. And I think that applies to everybody. The camera's at the top of the screen. So if I'm looking at the camera, I'm actually not looking at the screen. I'm not looking at you. Second thing, I'm going to be using, during the course of the presentation, I'm going to be using the chat bar on the right-hand side. So if you've got any questions, just type in your question into the chat bar. And when I'm finished presenting, because I'm going to share my screen with you, when I'm finished presenting, I'll go back and have a look at the chat bar and see if there's any questions that you had while we were busy. Okay. In the meantime, it is better if your microphones are off. If you inadvertently expel any gas and that gets recorded, it's not going to be very well, fun for you. So yeah, just switch your microphones off, keep them off, and if you've got a question, just type it into the reading pane or the comments pane on the right. Okay. Then once the recording is done, once the lesson is done, the recording gets saved to my drive automatically. That usually takes about 5 or 6 minutes. And once that is saved, I then go and take this video and post it onto the Google Classroom page so that if you need to go back and look at anything, the video is there for you to access. Okay. If you haven't got access like it was the case yesterday, sometimes there's a little bit of a hiccup, just send me that request. And then as soon as I get that request through, I'm then able to go and release it for everybody. So if it doesn't let you in to start with, just send me a request once and I'll go and release it for everyone. Okay. So what we are doing, and I'm guessing that everybody had a look at the slides yesterday. Before I get or go anywhere or go any further with those slides, if you've got a question, just switch your microphone off. Just ask me a question on the work that we covered yesterday. No questions? Okay, then I'm going to go into presentation mode. Just also be aware that the meeting is going to be recorded with regards to attendance of the meeting. So you need to be aware of that. I'm recording the attendance. And I'm busy loading that meet attendance now. Okay, so Connor, Zhao, Kamea, Michaela, Ntando, Shannon, Tash, and Tato. Those are the ones that are here. Okay, so that attendance is now recorded, and I'm going to go into presentation mode so that you can have a look. Okay, it's going to start loading up now. I just want anybody, it doesn't matter. Michaela was first, so Michaela, tag, you're it. If you see my slide presentation instead of the old page, then just let me know. Michaela, switch your microphone off and just let me know.
So you can see it.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
All
right, so this is where you would have finished off yesterday if you went through that slide presentation on strikes, where we talk about this strike being with more than one person stops working to put pressure on the employer. And remember what I'd said is it's all about people going on strike for a common purpose. So everybody, when they go on strike, it's got to be for the same thing. You can't have 2 people going on strike, but one person is because of wages and the other person is because of working hours. Then you can't go on strike. And it's not a legal strike, okay? And it can't be classified as a strike when it's only one person. So that's just the basis on what we did yesterday. or what you would have heard yesterday in the presentation that I did and that you hopefully all watched. So then we move on to protected versus unprotected strikes. Now, I know this is quite a long slide. Like I said, I forget who asked me now, Zhao. I'm not going to go into to do too many slides because there is quite a bit here. And I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on these slides. So like I said, we're not going to go too far. Okay, so two different types of strikes, unprotected versus protected. Now, a strike is protected if the correct dispute resolution procedure was followed or the Labour Relations Act procedures were followed. So what that means is if staff try and go on a strike, or they do go on a strike, and they haven't followed the correct procedures, the strike is deemed unprotected. Okay. If they follow the correct procedures, the strike will then be protected. Now, there's a very big difference between being protected and not protected, and we'll go through it now in a minute. But the Labour Relations Act procedure says that if you want to go on a strike, your dispute must be sent in writing to the CCMA, the Bargaining Council, or the Statutory Council. It needs to be a written letter to the CCMA telling them about your dispute. From there, the CCMA or whoever it is will try and resolve the dispute with you and your staff member or you and your employer within 30 days. Okay, so they've got 30 days, that organization, to try and resolve the dispute. Generally, they get it done within about 2 weeks. The organization, that's the CCMA or Bargaining Council or whoever, if they are unable to resolve the dispute in 30 days, they then have to, by law, issue a certificate to say that there's been no resolution of that dispute. In other words, the dispute has not been resolved. There is no solution. With that certificate, you as the employee will then go and give your employer a copy of that certificate a minimum of 48 hours before you intend going on strike. But if it is a government institution, in other words, if the staff are employed by the government, a minimum of 7 days needs to be given to the employer. In other words, the employees need to give government a minimum of 7 working days notice that they intend on going on strike. Okay, all of that has got to happen in the correct procedure or in the correct steps. And remember, it's 30 days. After 30 days, there's no solution. 48 hours notice if it is a private employer. 7 working days notice if it is a government employer. Okay. Then, during a protected strike, now this is important, employees cannot be dismissed for striking, but can be dismissed for misconduct. So if your staff have followed the correct procedures, they've been issued with a certificate to say that there's no resolution, and they gave you 48 hours written notice that they intend on going on strike. When they go on strike, as long as it's 48 hours later, when they go on strike, you may not dismiss them. That is an illegal dismissal, and you will then be taken to the CCMA, and you'll have to pay out, etc., etc. So you've got to make sure that you don't dismiss staff if they are participating in a protected strike. But even if the strike is protected and staff now cause damage to property, they disrupt business, then you can apply for a court interdict and you can have those staff members dismissed, obviously pending a disciplinary hearing and all the other procedures that need to take place. But you can then dismiss the staff member for violence or damage to property. Okay. The employer cannot stop the strike with a court interdict. So you can't stop people from going on strike with an interdict from the court. You can't go and apply at the court to say, I need to stop the strike. They won't do it. But you can use the interdict to stop illegal acts by your striking workers. So if you don't want to go the route of just dismissing them because they're being violent, you can go to court, get an interdict, and that interdict will stop them from causing damage to property. Because with that interdict, you get the police over to arrest them for causing damage to property. But you can't dismiss them, okay, unless they are damaging property. The employer cannot claim for a loss of production or a breach of contract by striking workers. So you can't go and claim from insurance because your workers are on strike and now you've lost an income. There isn't insurance for that. You won't get paid out. And a no work, no pay rule is applied to striking workers. So even if workers are on a protected strike, you do not have to pay them. There was a case quite a few years ago where government employed teachers went on strike. And the government refused to pay teachers who went on strike unless the school could provide a register of staff who signed in and out every day as evidence that they were actually working. So it was a general rule, all staff will not be paid unless that registration was signed and submitted to the government. Okay, so if you don't work because you're on strike, then you don't get paid. But you cannot be dismissed. So now this is where a lot of conflict comes in. This is where some violence comes in with striking as well. You hear about striking workers causing unrest, etc., etc. What happens is, if staff member A, B, C, and D, because if it's just A, it's not a strike. Staff members A, B, C, and D go on strike. But staff member F chooses not to go on strike because he can't afford to lose his income. Staff members A through D are not receiving income because they're going on strike because they want a better pay increase. But staff member F doesn't go on strike, keeps going to work. This is where the violence comes in, because the staff members who went on strike are going to say it's unfair that they're not getting paid. The other staff member who's at work is getting paid. And when you go on strike, if the salary increase is given, everybody gets that increase, including the staff member who was at work the entire time. So when they go on strike, they actually do it to try and put pressure on the employer to give in to their demands. But when you've got staff member going to work, it's not putting the employer under as much pressure as if everybody was on strike. And that's when the striking employees will resort to violence or resort to aggression to try and influence the other staff members to join them on the strike. And that's where those issues come in. That's why a lot of times you'll see that when there's a strike, people are actually, there's violence. And that's purely to try and get everybody to join them on the strike. Okay. Then a strike is unprotected if workers have a signed agreement stating that they are not permitted to strike for that particular issue. So, and this is perfectly legal, if I have a petrol station and I employ you to come and work for me, and I say to you, listen, I'm going to be giving you the standard pay is, let's thumbsuck a figure, 80 Rand an hour. And I say to you, I'm going to start you all off on 100 Rand an hour, but on the condition that for the next 5 years, you are going to receive a 5% increase in your salary for the next 5 years. Standard. That is not going to change. And you've signed to agree for that. You may then not go on strike for a wage increase for the contract of that period. In other words, for that contract period. So in other words, for the next 5 years. Okay. Correct procedures have not been followed. So if you go on strike and you haven't followed those procedures, in other words, going to the CCMA, getting your certificate, etc., etc., if you haven't followed those procedures, your strike is unprotected. If an arbitration decision, that is an internal agreement, has been made, if that decision is ignored, your strike is unprotected. So if you go to arbitration phase and a decision is given, but you ignore that decision and go on strike, your strike will be unprotected. Striking workers are part of essential services, such as the police force, nurses, etc. So if you're an essential service worker, you are not allowed to go on strike. It's as simple as that. A certificate to strike will not be given by CCMA, by labor courts, if you're part of essential services. That does not apply to you. The Labor Relations Act does not apply to you. In other words, basic conditions of employment. If you work for the police force, basic conditions of employment, not part of your contract. If you're part of the South African Secret Service, you don't form part of that contract. You cannot go on strike. If you go on strike, it is unprotected. Now, why is that important? Because, and before I actually go there, excuse me, an unprotected strike, you can be dismissed. If you go on strike, that is unprotected. Apart from not being paid, so if the strike is protected, you don't get your salary. If the strike is unprotected, you don't get your salary, but you can be dismissed. That's the big difference between protected versus unprotected. Your employer can dismiss you. So if staff are being difficult and they've chosen to go on an unprotected strike, why not just dismiss all of them and employ new staff who are not going to go on strike? I can hear some of you asking that question. The reason is, if you go and dismiss everybody, now think about a platinum mine out towards Sun City, those big platinum mines that are out there. If you go and dismiss every single mine worker there, you're talking about a few thousand staff. Now you need to go and re-advertise for those positions, interview for those positions, place them, train them, etc. That the cost in that is going to be huge, because now you have to shut down whilst you're trying to fill those posts, whilst you're trying to train those staff members, etc., etc. They're going to make mistakes because it's a new business. Even though they've been trained, it's a new environment for them. There's going to be mistakes. So you don't really want to just, if it's an unprotected strike and they're not being if they're not being difficult and they've gone on an unprotected strike, and it's all your staff and it's a lot of staff, you don't necessarily want to go and dismiss all of them. Okay. Although you do have the right to do so. Okay. Then the next one, this is one that I'm going to stop at. After this slide, you'll see it continues to secondary action, etc., but we'll continue with that for the next lesson. Other types of industrial action. Lockouts. Now, a lockout occurs when the employer refuses to let employees return to work unless they accept the offers of demands that are related to the strike. So, staff go on a strike because of poor wage increases or for a change in working hours, etc. The employer can close the gates and refuse to allow them to return to work until they give in to his demands. Now, a business is not necessarily going to do that very quickly in South Africa, because businesses are not in a financial position to do that, generally speaking. But if you are in a position to do that, it is a good way to say to staff, right, you're going on strike, that's fine. Your strike is going to be for 5 days. Just be aware, when those 5 days are done, I'm going to be locking you out for another 5 days. And that can put pressure on the staff. You can say to them, for every day you're going on strike, I'm going to be doing a lockout. So if you go on strike for 2 days, I'm going to lock you out for another 2 days. And that puts pressure back on the employees now to give in to your demands, because the employee knows that if he goes on strike, he's losing his income. And if he goes on strike, he knows he can lose his income for 2 or 3 days. After that, he's going to start getting into some serious financial difficulties. So he'll take the risk and go on strike for 2 or 3 days. But then knowing you're going to lock him out for another 2 or 3 days could cause him to give in to some of your demands. Okay, so there is another way around it as an employer. Then reasons for strikes or lockouts. So these are some examples of why strikes or lockouts occur. The first one is for wage increases. We've addressed that. Recognition of a trade union. So the employees who are members of a trade union have the right to go on strike to force the employer to recognize the trade union that they are members of. Now, why is that important? Because as an employer, you have to collect, by law, the trade union membership fees of your staff and pay it over to that trade union and recognize that trade union and negotiate with that trade union. If you don't recognize the trade union, you are saying, I'm not going to negotiate with the trade union, I'm not collecting membership fees for that trade union, etc., etc. So they can go on strike to recognize the trade union, to force the employer to recognize that trade union. Then changes made to working conditions without consulting employees or trade unions. So if the petrol industry, the owner of the petrol station says, we're not going to be working from 6 to 6 anymore, we're working from 5 to 5, and doesn't consult anybody, the employees, without consultation, they can go through the correct procedures to try and resolve the dispute. But again, if they follow the procedures and nothing is forthcoming, they can then go on strike. And the last one there is to support another protected strike. So this is important. If company A staff go on a protected strike, so they've followed all the processes and procedures, and the strike that they're embarking on is for a wage increase, hypothetically. And that wage increase is, I need to turn off these notifications, it's distracting me terribly. That wage increase is something that applies to other businesses in the same industry. Now, company A staff go on that protected strike. Company B staff give their employer the correct notification, etc. They can then join that protected strike for the same purpose, and they will fall under the same protection as the original protected strike. So if I join a protected strike and I followed my processes of notifying my employer, I will then also be protected. Okay. Picketing involves employees standing outside their workplace holding signboards with relevant messages that express their grievance. Workers have the right to picket if it is organized by a registered trade union. You can't just decide on your own or with a group of 2 or 3 people, you're just going to go and stand outside and picket. It's got to be something that is organized, and you've got to go through the correct procedures. The trade union has gained the employer's permission to picket on the premises, and that it is a peaceful demonstration. Now, some important things here about picketing. Because it needs to be registered. Okay, so you need to follow the correct procedures to register a picket. But from there, your employer may not, without good reason, refuse to allow you to picket on the premises. So think about a petrol station now. If the staff or if the petrol pump attendants and the workers in the convenience store, they want to go on a picket, they apply to the owner of the petrol station, and he says, I'm not going to allow you to picket on the premises. If you want to picket, you need to go and stand on the pavement off my property. He's got to give a good reason for that. It can't just be because he doesn't want them there. Okay? If he says the reason being there are motorists driving on the forecourt, and if you're picketing, you could get hit by a car. It's a safety issue. If you're picketing and it's causing a disruption to the business, then also he can refuse or he can get you to leave where you are standing picketing because you are causing a disruption to the business. Picketing is a disruption to the business, as it is. But if you're preventing customers from entering the premises, then you can be told to move. If it is dangerous, you can be told to move. But other than that, he cannot refuse, or he is unable to say to you, you may not picket on site. Okay. If it is peaceful, he's got absolutely no right to chase you off the premises. It's a peaceful demonstration. You are not interfering with customers or motorists. He cannot ask you to leave the premises. Okay. So that's where I said that I was going to stop. So I'm going to get out of this and go back to my presentation. Sorry, guys. Stop presenting. Okay, so we're back. Right, so we've got a couple of questions here. So, Ntando, essential service workers getting better pay, it's simply negotiations with government. You can't go on strike with it, but they can negotiate with government. So nurses will have their own trade union. Police have their trade union, but they can't take it to the next step. They can't go and say, we're going to go on strike. It's simple. It's a simple negotiation. Okay, it's one of those things that they agree to when they join that profession. Lockout would also be a disadvantage to an employer, especially if the employee goes on strike for a long period of time. Absolutely. That's why I said if the employer in South Africa, generally that won't happen because staff or businesses generally don't have enough finances to lock people out for an extended period of time. But a business that has got those finances and is in a position to do that, they'll do it to put pressure on their staff to get them to come back. If you think about a mine is a wage bill. You're probably looking at a couple million rand a month as a wage bill for a mine. Now, if you're adding an extra 3% onto that wage bill, it's big numbers. So if the employer can force them to come back with 2 or 3% less of an increase, it's saving that mine a lot of money. So, yeah. Shannon, which employees would be considered essential service down locked? Yeah, that's the essential service during lockdown is purely because of the nature of what we are in lockdown for. So the lockdown is different from normal essential services, I think. If you can't say that somebody working at a grocery store is an essential service. They can go on strike because it's not going to affect every single person working in a grocery store. And even then, if Pick n Pay, let's say everybody at Pick n Pay goes on strike, Pick n Pay can go and hire temporary staff to fill those roles while their permanent staff are on strike. So it doesn't stop the business from operating. It just puts pressure on them. Okay. Pick n Pay will always go, or Checkers or whoever, will go and employ temporary staff so they can cover and make sure that they're actually still trading. But under lockdown, it's a different scenario. So under lockdown, people are at home and they need food to survive. They are not traveling. And that's why it makes it a little bit of a different essential service because of the lockdown scenario. Okay. But food service is not essential. If you look at takeaway deliveries under level 4 lockdown, takeaway deliveries, that is not an essential service. But yet, they're allowed to return to work and teachers aren't. So you can't tell me that school is not essential, but fast food takeaway is. Okay, so under lockdown, it's a very different scenario. I hope I've answered your question there, Shannon. Then Kimaya, are employees who are employed on temporary contracts allowed to strike? Yes, so long as they are part of a trade union. Okay, if they are part of a trade union, they may go on strike. If you've filled in a contract and you've signed a contract to say, this is my wage for that period of time, like I said earlier, I've signed that contract, I'm a temporary employee for whatever, 6 months, but now I want more pay. I can't go on strike for more pay because my contract says that's my strike, that's my pay. Okay. Then, title, talking about lockouts being effective. Yes, they can be very effective. A lockout can put pressure on staff, especially in South Africa. If you look at the general blue collar worker in South Africa, the blue collar worker lives on month to month financially. In other words, from 1 month to the next, they can't afford to not receive an income. So if you say to a blue collar worker, if you stay away from work, I'm going to be locking you out and you're going to lose even more money. They're not in a position to be able to do that because they're leveraged to the max. Their salary goes towards their property that they may have bought. It goes to food, it goes to basics, and then they have no money left. In fact, some of them live on credit. So lockouts, yes, can be effective. Would a petrol station be an essential service? No, but personally, I would argue that a petrol station would be an essential service because if your essential service staff, think about police, think about doctors, ambulances, those are essential services. If petrol stations are now closed, they are unable to carry on traveling and performing their jobs. So personally, yes, I would deem personally a petrol station to be an essential service, but it isn't listed as an essential service. Okay. Have I answered all your questions? If I haven't answered, or if you want more clarity on anything, you can switch off your microphone. You don't have to type anymore. You can switch off your microphone and ask away, guys. Are there any questions?
Sir?
Yes, Ntando.
In our paper too, though, if we argued that a petrol station was like an essential service, would we get marks or would we not?
You will get marks if you argue that point that I've just said.
Okay.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, police, how are police going to get around if they haven't got access to petrol? How are they going to be able to do their jobs? So it is essential in that sense, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to take it as no more questions. Remember, guys, if you do have a question later on while you're busy doing study notes or whatever, I'm more than willing to join you for a live meet, or if you want to just send an email and ask me a question, you're welcome to do that. But this video is also going to be posted onto the Google Classroom page so that you can access it just like you did the other video. I'm going to put this one there so you can go back and have a look. If you want access to the slides, look at the video and you can have a look at the slides again. Tando?
So what's happening with marks? Like what's gonna be like where we're gonna get our marks from?
For this term?
Yes.
Is going to be, it depends what time you come back to school in Tando. Right now, as it stands, matrics will return on the 1st of June. And then we're trying to see if we can get grade 11s and 9s back before the grade 8s and 10s. Because grade 11 and 9 is more important than grade 8 and 10 because of subject choices, because of prep for matric, etc., etc. So it just depends on when you come back. If you don't come back in time, there's going to be online assessments that you're going to be doing. And there are going to be, we are trying to plan to have some kind of an exam for you for at least some subjects. And I think a lot of schools are going to be doing the same thing. In fact, some schools have cancelled exams altogether except for matrics. We're not doing that at this stage. We're going to make you write some exams if you come back in time to do it. So all this work that we're covering online, you need to make sure that you know it and that you understand it, because it's work that's going to be in your mid-year exam, if we have time for a mid-year exam when you get back.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. So what I'm going to do now then is I'm going to ask you to take what we've done. So you're taking strikes, pickets, lockouts, etc., that whole industrial action bit that we've done, and link it to some aspect of business environments. So when you talk about a lockout, when you talk about labor policies or working hours and that kind of thing, link it to some aspect of environments. I'll give you an example. If you're talking about you're taking working hours, that's something that's part of Basic Conditions of Employment Act, which is part of law, which is in what environment? Macro. Okay, so if you go, I want you to now go and link as much as you can to those different environments. When you talk about micro, you can talk about workplace forums, a place where staff can get together to negotiate and discuss with the employer on how the business moves forward with regards to working hours or pay. So negotiations. Remember, trade unions are not part of macro or micro. Trade unions are market environment. So go and link those things to environments. When you come to a paper 2, that linking is going to be automatic for you when you write this type of paper. Okay, so that is what I want you to focus on for the next 15 minutes of this lesson. Any questions on that? Let me see. None. Okay. So if you're all good, then that's it. Just remember, give the video 5-6 minutes before I can actually post it on Google Classroom. Unless you have any questions, you can stay behind and I'll answer them. Otherwise, thank you guys, and you may log off.